$40,000. That's roughly the cost of an Iranian drone. But bringing it down can cost the opponent several million. That's the kind of war Iran is waging in the Middle East, not on the battlefield, but on the balance sheet. And now, in the fourth week of this conflict, something absolutely decisive is taking shape right before our eyes. What I'm about to explain in the next few minutes, you won't hear presented this way in mainstream media. Most analyses focus on airstrikes, explosions, and official statements. I'm going deeper into the underlying mechanics of this conflict, the logic driving it, and most importantly, why this war could end up reshaping the global order far beyond the Middle East. Stay with me. If this is your first time watching Flash America, make sure to subscribe. Global dynamics are shifting by the hour, and you need to stay informed. Let's rewind 3 weeks. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched Operation Epic Fury, a series of coordinated strikes targeting Iranian military infrastructure, nuclear facilities, senior command centers, and even the inner circle of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. In the opening hours, Washington and Tel Aviv believed they had crippled the system. They thought they had won the first round of a decisive confrontation. But here's what they underestimated. 3 weeks later, Iran is still launching missiles, targeting bases across the Gulf, including the UAE, Qatar, and Bahrain. Over 200 American personnel have been injured across multiple countries. The Strait of Hormuz is effectively paralyzed. More than 3,000 vessels are stuck, according to the International Maritime Organization. And oil prices have surged by 45% since the start of the conflict, surpassing $110 per barrel, something few saw coming. Because this conflict breaks a fundamental assumption about war. We instinctively think in terms of firepower. Whoever hits harder wins. That's true in some wars. But this isn't one of them. Iran is not trying to defeat the United States in a conventional military sense. That would be a strategic miscalculation. Instead, Iran is pursuing a different objective, not to win the war, but to make it unbearable. And that's a crucial distinction. Winning a conventional war means destroying the enemy's forces, seizing territory, and forcing surrender. Iran neither has the capacity nor the intention to do that. What it does have, however, is the ability to stretch the conflict over time, pushing it to a point where the cost becomes intolerable. The opponent decides that the political cost and the economic and military burden of continuing the conflict outweigh the original objective. That's the logic of attrition warfare. And it's not new. It's the same logic the United States faced in Afghanistan for 20 years. They faced it in Iraq as well. Each time, overwhelming military superiority ran into a form of resistance that didn't aim to win outright, but to slowly erode not the army itself, but the political will to keep going. Iran has studied those precedents carefully, and it has built its doctrine around the lessons learned from them. Now, let's talk about you. I know what some of you are thinking. This is far away. It's the Middle East. It doesn't concern me directly. Let me give you one number that should change that perception. 20%. That's the share of global oil supply that passes through the Strait of Hormuz, just off Iran's coast. Not 5%, not 10-20. 1/5 of the oil that powers factories, transportation, heating systems. In short, the global economy flows through a maritime corridor only 54 kilometers wide. That's roughly the distance of a 1-hour drive. Every single day, between 15 and 17 million barrels of crude oil transit through that narrow passage. Since March 2nd, a senior official from Iran's Revolutionary Guard has confirmed actions effectively restricting access to the strait. As a result, oil tanker traffic has dropped by around 70%. Maritime insurance premiums have surged by 125%. To put that into perspective, insurance costs have risen from about 0.2 to 0.4% of a shipment's value to dramatically higher levels. For a large oil tanker, that can mean an extra $250,000 per trip just in insurance. This isn't theory. This shows up directly on your energy bill. Every spike in tension in that corridor translates into higher prices at the pump. This war isn't distant. It's already affecting you. Now here's the first key point that many analysts are still underestimating. The the nature of Iran's projectiles matters just as much as their quantity. Let's look at the numbers. In the first 24 hours of the conflict alone, Iran launched 167 missiles and 541 drones at the United Arab Emirates. 541 drones in a single day. Since the beginning of the conflict, air defense systems have intercepted over 338 ballistic missiles, 15 cruise missiles, and 1,740 drones, according to official defense sources. Take a second to process that. 1,740 drones. Now compare that to the cost of stopping them. A single Patriot Pack, 3 missile, the type used to intercept ballistic threats, costs between $3 million and $4 million per unit. The United States produces roughly 500 of them per year. In contrast, Iran can produce in a single month what the US produces in a year in terms of offensive projectiles at a fraction of the cost. That's not just a tactical advantage. It's a structural one. A 2024 report from the International Institute for Strategic Studies estimated that Iran was producing between 1,500 and 2,000 Shahed-type drones per month, with the ability to scale production rapidly. And even after recent strikes reduced that capacity by up to 90% compared to the first days of the conflict, Iran is still launching attacks. Even at just 10% of its original capacity, the system keeps running. That's the key point. And here's something even fewer people are highlighting. Iran didn't build this military architecture by accident. Years of US sanctions, designed to weaken Iran economically, ended up producing the opposite effect. Instead of collapsing, Iran adapted. It didn't remain a consumption-based economy integrated into global markets. It shifted toward a war-oriented model, developing a sovereign military industry capable of producing missiles and drones at scale, without relying on imports that sanctions could block. Sanctions didn't disarm Iran. They forced it to become self-sufficient. That's the real outcome of the maximum pressure strategy, and it's the exact opposite of what was intended. Because despite official statements claiming that Iran's naval capabilities are ineffective or that its ballistic program has been neutralized, missiles and drones are still landing in the Gulf, near strategic targets in the UAE and Qatar. The system is still operational. On Sunday, Iranian drones reportedly sparked a fire near a Dubai International Logistics Hub, temporarily disrupting flights. On Monday, drones struck again, this time hitting the Mina Al Ahmadi refinery in Kuwait for the second consecutive day. This is not a regime collapsing. It's a regime adapting, shifting from saturation waves to high-precision strikes targeting energy infrastructure, using missiles with warheads reportedly exceeding 1,000 kilograms, according to an IRGC commander on March 10th. That's the hidden dimension behind the apparent chaos. This conflict is not just a war between Iran and the United States. It's a full-scale, real-world stress test of Western air defense architectures. And that test is exposing vulnerabilities that military experts understood in theory, but had never seen at this scale. The issue isn't that systems like Patriot are ineffective, they are highly advanced and capable. The real problem lies in the assumption underpinning Western defense doctrine that the adversary would be constrained by limited resources and therefore unable to sustain large-scale, prolonged saturation attacks. That assumption is now proving false. And its failure calls into question decades of investment in extremely expensive defense systems, designed to intercept rare, high-value threats, not to absorb continuous waves of low-cost projectiles. Russia in Ukraine offered an early version of this shift. Iran is now demonstrating it at an industrial scale. What U.S. military planners are likely discussing behind closed doors right now is not simply how to win this conflict, but how to redesign defensive systems for the next 20 years. Let me ask you, did you expect this conflict to last this long? Now, let's talk about the victims, the ones you don't see on camera. Behind the missile counts and official statements, there are human realities that geopolitical analyses often erase. At the port of Fujairah in the UAE, maintenance workers on oil platforms, many from the Philippines, India, and Pakistan, have been urgently evacuated. Some had been working there for years, only to be put on planes within hours. In the Strait of Hormuz, tanker crews are now enduring extended rotations, 4 to 6 extra days in high-risk zones, for salaries ranging between $800 and $1,500 per month, often without hazard pay. In Basra, southern Iraq, families living near targeted U.S. bases have started leaving their homes. They are not officially counted as refugees or internally displaced persons. They are simply leaving because they're afraid. These people don't appear in strategic models. Yet they are the ones physically bearing the weight of this conflict. According to U.S. Central Command, more than 200 American personnel have been injured across 7 countries since the beginning of hostilities: Bahrain, Iraq, Israel, Jordan, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. This conflict has no clear borders. Now, let's break down the scenarios currently on the table and what each one implies. Scenario 1. Gradual de-escalation through forced negotiation. This is the current trajectory. The Pentagon reports that Iranian missile launches have decreased by 90% compared to the first days of the conflict, and drone attacks by 86%. Operation Epic Fury has significantly degraded Iran's naval forces, air capabilities, air defense systems, and nuclear program. Yet Iran is still striking. And on March 21st, the Trump administration, after declaring military success, made a notable move. It temporarily eased sanctions on Iranian oil exports in an attempt to bring global prices down. That's the White House using its primary lever, economic pressure. According to U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, this decision could add around 140 million barrels to global markets. But this is not a position of strength. It's a concession driven by rising oil prices. Meanwhile, Russian oil is emerging as one of the major economic winners of this conflict. According to analysts cited by Newsweek, disruptions in the Strait of Hormuz have opened new opportunities for Moscow. Several tankers carrying Russian crude originally bound for China have been redirected to India since early March. And here's what few people are connecting. While Washington and Tehran exhaust each other, Moscow is increasing its revenues and strengthening its trade routes. Economic warfare isn't limited to the direct participants. Scenario 2. Escalation and prolonged disruption of the Strait of Hormuz. This is the most dangerous path. Iran has effectively restricted access to vessels linked to the U.S., Israel, and their allies. Since March 5th, 22 countries have signed a joint statement condemning attacks on commercial shipping and calling for freedom of navigation. But no concrete military action has followed. Italy's defense minister, Guido Crosetto, explicitly stated there would be no war mission and no military intervention without a broader multilateral initiative. At the same time, Trump has publicly criticized NATO allies for not deploying forces, calling them paper tigers and signaling a reduced reliance on traditional alliances. Here's the core issue. More than 3,000 ships are currently blocked in the region. Oil tankers are effectively being used as floating storage, but that capacity is filling up fast. Oil prices have already surpassed $110 per barrel. The World Bank modeled a similar scenario in 2023, a partial closure of the Strait of Hormuz lasting 30 days. Estimated impact? A 1.5 percentage point drop in global GDP. For comparison, the 2008 financial crisis caused a contraction of about 2.1%. In other words, this scenario alone could trigger a near-global economic shock. We're talking about a shock of comparable magnitude. And in this scenario, the United States faces an impossible choice: either allow its European and Asian economic allies to absorb a devastating energy shock, or impose maritime security in a zone where Iranian drones and naval mines are now deployed on a daily basis. 10 Warthogs are reportedly flying low-altitude missions over the strait, targeting IRGC fast boats, according to General Dan Kane, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. This is the scenario no one wanted. And precisely for that reason, it's becoming increasingly likely. Scenario 3. Internal collapse in Iran. This is what Washington and Tel Aviv are hoping for, and also the least likely in the short term. Not because the Iranian regime is popular, it isn't. Since the protest movements of 2019 and 2022, Internal data has shown deep distrust toward the government. But external war doesn't trigger internal collapse. It delays it. That's a historical constant. When a country is attacked from the outside, populations, even those who oppose their government, tend to rally around a defensive national identity rather than revolt. The new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, has made it clear that the Strait of Hormuz will remain closed as long as necessary to maintain pressure on the United States. That's a clear signal. Leadership continuity is secured, and the system remains operational. This scenario may be desirable for Western decision-makers, but structurally, it's unlikely. That's not a political opinion. It's conflict mechanics. Now, let's look at the 4 key variables that will determine what happens next in the coming days. 1. U.S. interceptor stockpiles *** beyond official statements. What matters is supply. The U.S. has deployed an additional amphibious strike group, including the USS Boxer, along with thousands of Marines from California. Watch logistics movements, not press briefings. 2. Behavior of Gulf monarchies *** Saudi Arabia is not officially part of the conflict, yet its oil infrastructure is within range of Iranian missiles. Iraq is attempting mediation between Washington and Tehran to allow Iraqi tankers to pass safely. If Riyadh opens discreet diplomatic channels, it means the pressure has become unsustainable. 3. Oil prices ***. This is the most honest thermometer of the conflict. Once prices exceed $120 per barrel, the pressure for a diplomatic resolution becomes structural. We're already around $110 and rising. 4. Activation of Iranian proxy networks ***. Hezbollah in Lebanon has resumed operations. The Houthis in Yemen have renewed threats in the Gulf of Aden and the Red Sea after months of relative pause. If these actors begin seeking their own arrangements, it will signal that internal pressure on Iran is starting to take effect. These 4 variables will tell you more than any official presidential statement. But there's one final dimension you need to understand before we conclude: American credibility, not in an abstract sense, but in a structural, mechanical one that underpins global geopolitics. The strength of the U.S. position in the world doesn't rely solely on military power. It relies on the credibility of a promise. If you are our ally, we will protect you. That promise is the invisible architecture behind alliances, military bases, treaties, and global trade partnerships. Right now, that architecture is under strain. Trump is openly criticizing NATO allies. He is publicly distancing the U.S. from commitments to countries like Japan, South Korea, and Australia, claiming America does not need anyone's help. And in the corridors of power, from Tokyo to Warsaw to Riyadh, a question is quietly emerging. It's not being asked publicly, but in private conversations between generals, finance ministers, and strategists calculating the real cost of American protection. It's there. Can the United States still guarantee security? And this is not a question being asked by America's adversaries. It's being asked by its allies. It's these allies who are now starting to ask that question. And perhaps it is in this quiet shift, far from the noise of televised debates, that the real long-term strategic impact of this conflict will be decided. Not on the Iranian battlefield, but in closed rooms in Brussels, Tokyo, Warsaw, or Riyadh. This war will not end with a clear military victory by one side over the other. That's not the nature of this conflict. It will end when one of the two sides calculates that the cost of continuing exceeds the objective it set out to achieve. For the United States and Israel, that objective is the long-term neutralization of the Iranian threat. But that goal, as defined, has no clear finish line. When can you say a threat is permanently neutralized? No one can answer that with precision. For Iran, the objective is different: regime survival and recognition of its regional security role. That's a more flexible goal, one that is easier to declare as achieved. It's an asymmetry rooted in endurance. Iran knows when it can stop. The United States does not, at least not yet. And in that uncertainty lies the core logic of Iran's resilience. This isn't just about power. It's not just ideology. It's geometry. A war you can afford to lose on the battlefield while still standing is a war you cannot lose strategically. Iran has lost nuclear facilities, senior leadership figures, bases, and capabilities. But it is still standing. And as long as it stands, it can impose its terms in any negotiation. Read that again. That's the heart of the issue. This conflict is not an anomaly. It's a prototype. For decades, dominant military doctrine rested on a central assumption that Western technological superiority, highly advanced, highly precise, and extremely expensive weapon systems was an insurmountable advantage. That doctrine worked against opponents who couldn't bypass it. The problem is, some adversaries have learned how to bypass it. Not by defeating it directly, but by making it economically unsustainable. If you need to use a Mercedes to shoot down another Mercedes, your opponent only needs to keep sending them until you run out. That's the logic behind Shahed drones. That's the logic of saturation. And that logic is spreading. Right now, in multiple countries observing this conflict closely, military engineers are taking notes. The key military question of the next decade will not be, how do we build better $4 million missiles? It will be, how do we build cheaper defensive systems capable of absorbing waves of low-cost projectiles without exhausting stockpiles in days? The decisions made in the next 30 days could shape global geopolitics for the next decade. Not just in the Middle East, but across every alliance, every defense strategy, every procurement decision, and every conversation about what protection really means in the world to come. The clock is ticking. And the real question is not who will win this war, but who will learn the fastest. Is Iran demonstrating that asymmetric warfare can make major military powers obsolete? Or are the United States on the verge of securing a victory that history will judge as decisive? And what do you think, will the Strait of Hormuz reopen before the end of the month? Let me know in the comments.